Welcome my channel. Tonight's story takes us deep into Natchez, Mississippi, in 1847, where a single enslaved boy became the center of a mystery so dark it tore two powerful families apart. This isn't rumor or legend. It's a case pieced together from court whispers, plantation records, and eyewitness accounts buried by time. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from right now, and don't forget to subscribe. A massive amount of effort goes into tracking down real historical details like these, and your support helps keep these forgotten stories alive. The story begins quietly, almost unnoticed, in the spring of 1847, when a slave trader's wagon rolled into Natchez under the heavy Mississippi sun. Natchez was already a place thick with wealth, secrets, and cruelty. Grand homes overlooking the river, families built on cotton and blood, and enslaved lives treated as inventory rather than people. Among the chained men and women in that wagon was a boy no more than 9 years old. He was thin, barefoot, and unusually silent. While the others cried, begged, or stared in fear, the boy simply watched. His eyes followed everything, the horses, the guards, the houses, with a calm that unsettled even the trader escorting him. The boy had no recorded name when he arrived. The papers listed him only as male child, strong, obedient. He was purchased quickly by the first family, the Whitmores, a respected and deeply religious household just outside Natchez. They believed the boy would be easy to mold, young enough to forget where he came from, old enough to work. But from the moment he stepped onto the Whitmore property, things felt wrong. The dogs refused to come near him. One of the horses reared violently when the boy passed, snapping its reins and nearly killing a stable hand. The overseer laughed it off as coincidence, but the enslaved workers noticed something else. The boy never flinched. Not at shouting, not at whips cracking nearby, not even when thunder split the sky at night. He simply stood still and watched. Inside the Whitmore house, the mistress insisted the boy be kept close, assigning him chores indoors instead of in the fields. She later told her sister that there was something unsettling about him. Yet she felt compelled to keep him near, as if drawn by something she couldn't explain. He moved silently through the halls, completing tasks before being asked, appearing suddenly in rooms without anyone hearing his steps. Servants whispered that he seemed to know things, when someone was ill before symptoms appeared, when tempers were about to explode, when bad news was coming down the river. Within weeks, small disturbances began. Glassware shattered without being touched. Candles blew out in still air. A family Bible fell from a table and split open to the same page repeatedly, a passage about judgment. The boy was always nearby when these things happened, though never directly involved. When questioned, he answered politely, softly, never defensive. His voice was calm, almost soothing, which somehow made it worse. The enslaved workers began avoiding him, giving him space, whispering prayers when he passed. One older woman claimed she heard him speaking at night, not shouting, not crying, but murmuring in a low tone to someone who wasn't there. Another said she saw him standing at the edge of the property at dawn, staring toward the river, as if waiting for something to arrive. When asked what he was doing, he replied simply, listening. The Whitmores dismissed the rumors. They believed fear bred foolishness. But then came the first incident that could not be ignored. The master's youngest son fell violently ill after playing near the boy in the yard. Fever took him within 2 days. Doctors blamed infection, heat, Bad air, anything but the truth no one wanted to say out loud. The boy had been sitting nearby when the child collapsed. He had not touched him. He had not spoken. He had only watched. After the funeral, the house changed. Lotta vanished. The mistress withdrew into herself, claiming the walls felt closer, the air heavier. She became convinced the boy brought bad fortune, yet she could not bring herself to sell him. Each time she tried, something stopped her. Buyers backed out, paperwork vanished. The boy fell ill suddenly and recovered just as quickly. It was as if he could not leave. That was when the second family entered the story. A neighboring plantation, wealthy and influential, requested to borrow the boy temporarily. His calm demeanor had impressed visitors. The Whitmores agreed, relieved to see him gone, unaware they were passing something dangerous into another household. When the wagon carried him away, several enslaved workers swore they heard a strange sound echo across the fields. Not a cry, not a laugh, but something in between, carried faintly on the wind. No one in Natchez knew it yet, but that quiet arrival, that nameless boy stepping off a wagon, had already set something in motion. 2 families would be ruined, reputations erased, deaths explained away as coincidence. And at the center of it all would be a child who never raised his voice, never raised his hand, and never once tried to run. Because whatever followed him was already exactly where it wanted to be. The first sign that the boy's presence brought more than just unease came quickly, and it was devastating. The Whitmore family, despite their initial pride in owning such an obedient child, began to see cracks in their household that could not be explained by illness or misfortune alone. It started with small, subtle events. Silverware would vanish only to reappear shattered in the garden. A chest of linens, once neatly folded, was found torn to pieces, though no one claimed to have touched it. At first, the Whitmores blamed careless servants, careless winds, or simple accidents. But then came the death that no one could ignore, the sudden collapse of the youngest Whitmore son, a boy no older than 8, who had been healthy and strong the day before. The boy had been playing quietly nearby, sitting in the shade of the front porch and watching the other children. When the son collapsed, doctors were called, but they could find no infection, no fever, no signs of poison. The boy's heart simply failed. The Whitmores were shattered. Mourning filled the grand house, yet whispers began circulating among the enslaved workers. The boy had been present, watching, silently, and something about his stillness seemed tied to the child's sudden death. Fear, once merely unease, transformed into dread. It didn't end there. Shortly after the funeral, the family patriarch began experiencing strange occurrences. He would hear whispers at night, coming from empty rooms. Candles would extinguish themselves, and windows would rattle violently, even when there was no wind. Objects shifted inexplicably. Doors that had been shut firmly would be open in the morning, chairs tipped over without cause. Though these events were subtle at first, they compounded daily, filling the Whitmore household with a pervasive sense of doom. Everyone began walking on edge, afraid to be alone, afraid of the boy's silent gaze. The local doctor, who had been called to examine the boy after the first death, noted in his journal that he could find nothing medically wrong with him. The child was healthy, strong, and alert, yet there was something unnatural about the stillness he carried. The doctor observed that animals around the boy acted strangely. Dogs barked when he entered a room and would not come near him. Cats hissed and arched their backs, and even the horses seemed uneasy. These signs were dismissed at first as superstition, but over time, even the practical-minded began to fear that the child brought more than simple misfortune. The second tragedy struck within months. The Whitmore's eldest daughter, previously healthy and lively, fell suddenly ill. Unlike her brother, she lingered for several days, her condition worsening without explanation. No doctor could diagnose her, and every remedy tried failed. She would stare at the boy with wide, terrified eyes in her fleeting moments of lucidity, whispering that he is always near. Within a week, she too was gone. The Whitmores were left in grief, their family reduced to fragments. Friends and neighbors offered condolences, but suspicion quietly grew. Word spread the boy was present at the moments of death, always observing, never intervening, never crying. The enslaved workers noticed a pattern that the Whitmores either refused or feared to admit. The boy's presence seemed tied to misfortune, yet he did nothing overtly harmful. He did not strike, push, or act aggressively. Instead, he existed quietly, almost invisibly, while events around him spiraled into chaos. People began avoiding him, crossing themselves when he passed, whispering prayers under their breath. Even the household servants, who had endured years of hardship under the plantation's hierarchy, admitted that there was something in the child that they could not understand, something ancient, almost knowing, that was far beyond the realm of ordinary humans. The fear reached its height when a neighbor visiting the plantation fell suddenly ill after spending time near the boy. He was carried out in the middle of the night, pale and gasping, and recovered only after leaving the property. The Whitmores could no longer ignore the possibility that the boy was somehow involved in the pattern of deaths and illnesses. Yet what puzzled them most was that he never cried, never smiled, never reacted to the tragedies he seemed to follow. He was, in every observable way, a normal child, yet his presence seemed to mark misfortune wherever he went. By the end of the year, the Whitmore household was nearly empty. Friends had distanced themselves, fearful of unexplained death. The surviving family members spoke in hushed tones, avoiding the boy's gaze. And yet they could not bring themselves to sell him or remove him from the property. It was as if some invisible force held him there, tethered to the land and to the family he had already destroyed. Their grief was compounded by a growing sense of helplessness. They had become witnesses to something they could not explain, something that transcended human understanding. The first family's tragedy became a warning to others in Natchez. Rumors began circulating of a boy who brought death quietly, who watched without emotion, and whose presence was enough to shatter a household. Yet, even as neighbors whispered in fear, they could not see him when he was near. He was always still, always observing, always silent. The boy had arrived quietly, but his impact was catastrophic. What began as an ordinary arrival had become a disaster that no one could rationalize, leaving the Whitmores devastated and a community unsettled by the inexplicable pattern of death that seemed to follow a single, silent child. The story of the boy's presence became even more unnerving as it spread beyond the Whitmore household, reaching the neighboring plantation of the Carters, one of Natchez's wealthiest and most respected families. The Carters had long prided themselves on order and control. Their estate was a place of meticulous routines, strict hierarchies, and rigid discipline. They had heard whispers of the mysterious child at the Whitmores, though many dismissed it as gossip, an exaggeration born from grief. Still, curiosity mingled with a faint unease, and they requested the boy be temporarily lent to them, claiming it might be a chance for him to gain work experience in another household. The Whitmores, desperate to distance themselves from the child they feared but could not remove, agreed. Little did they know that in doing so, they were passing disaster into another family's hands. From the moment the boy arrived, strange occurrences began again. At first, they were subtle. A vase slightly off its base, the sound of footsteps echoing in empty halls, animals behaving oddly. The Carters initially dismissed these events, attributing them to the boy simply being unsettled in a new environment. But then came the first unmistakable incident. A fire broke out in the kitchen in the middle of the night. No one had been near the stove, and the flames erupted without warning. Though the fire was contained before it could spread, a young servant had been trapped and severely burned. The boy had been sitting silently in the parlor, a few feet away, watching as the events unfolded. His calmness, almost unnatural, unsettled everyone who witnessed it. Soon after, illnesses began to strike family members without warning or explanation. A young daughter complained of dizziness and nausea, and within hours, she was bedridden with a fever no doctor could diagnose. A visiting cousin grew weak overnight and died quietly, though the family doctor could find no visible cause. Each event seemed to occur when the boy was nearby, though there was never any evidence of direct harm. The pattern became undeniable. Misfortune followed him, though he remained passive, silent, and eerily composed. The household itself began to change. Doors would slam on their own, lights flickered when he passed, and strange shadows seemed to move in corners of rooms where no one stood. The adults whispered among themselves in panic, wondering if the child carried some kind of curse or ill fate with him. The enslaved workers, who had long observed him from the shadows, refused to enter certain rooms when he was present. One elder woman reportedly muttered that the boy carries something heavy in his heart and avoided him entirely. Even those who did not openly believe in curses felt an oppressive weight around the house, a sense of unease that could not be shaken, no matter how hard they tried. The tension escalated when a member of the Carter family was found dead under circumstances that no one could explain. The man had been healthy, active, and strong the previous evening. In the morning, he was discovered lying quietly in the parlor, eyes open, his face pale and expressionless. Panic gripped the household. Fear replaced curiosity, and anyone who came near the boy felt a cold, inexplicable dread. People began leaving the estate whenever possible, seeking refuge in neighboring homes or town, unwilling to stay within the confines of a house now haunted by misfortune. Neighbors and visitors began to take notice. Rumors of the boy's presence traveled quickly through Natchez, spreading from plantation to plantation. Whispers described the same pattern of calamity that had occurred at the Whitmore estate: the sudden deaths, inexplicable illnesses, mysterious fires, and strange behavior of animals. Even those who had not encountered him firsthand spoke of the silent boy as a force to be feared. People began avoiding contact with the Carters, afraid that simply being near the household might bring misfortune upon themselves. The boy, however, continued to act with complete composure, never displaying anger, fear, or sadness. When questioned, he offered polite, simple answers. Yet his calmness only amplified the unease of those around him. The Carters were trapped between dread and responsibility, unable to expel him, unable to explain what he was, and increasingly desperate as the pattern of tragedy continued. Each death and each accident only reinforced the sense that he was at the center of something beyond human comprehension. Eventually, the Carter family was irreparably shaken. Friends and relatives stopped visiting, fearful of falling victim to the strange curse that seemed to follow him. Servants refused to serve him directly, quietly avoiding rooms he entered. And the boy, still silent and composed, watched everything unfold without interference, his presence alone sufficient to unnerve every living being around him. By the time he left the Carter household, whether returned to the Whitmores or moved elsewhere, the damage had already been done, reputations tarnished, family members dead, and a community increasingly convinced that some force beyond human understanding rode with a small, silent child. In Natchez, this story became a whispered warning, a child so ordinary in appearance, yet so extraordinary in the calamity that followed him. No one could explain why two prominent families were destroyed while the boy remained untouched. And no one could say whether it was chance, misfortune, or something far darker. His presence had irrevocably altered the lives of those who crossed his path, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the town for decades to come. The boy's presence did not merely bring isolated incidents of death or misfortune. It had a ripple effect that extended far beyond the immediate households he inhabited. After the tragedies at the Whitmore and Carter plantations, the surrounding community began to take notice. Farmers, traders, and neighbors who had once seen the boy playing quietly on the porches or wandering the fields began reporting strange occurrences of their own. Animals in the vicinity became restless and erratic. Dogs would growl at empty air, cats would arch their backs and hiss at shadows that no one else could see, and livestock that had never shown fear suddenly refused to cross certain paths. It was as though his presence alone carried a weight that disrupted the natural order. The local townspeople became increasingly uneasy. Rumors spread like wildfire. A child who brought death merely by being near, whose silent gaze could chill a grown man's soul. Some believed it was the work of the devil, others insisted it was a divine punishment for the sins of the plantation owners. The boy himself never acted aggressively. He did not strike, curse, or threaten. He merely existed, calm and watchful. As if aware of a power he neither sought nor needed to hide. And yet, with each household he entered, calamity followed. Even those who tried to rationalize the events were forced to confront patterns that defied explanation. The influence of the boy extended to the social fabric of Natchez itself. Families who had been friendly with the Whitmores or Carters began avoiding them entirely. Invitations to dinners, visits to town, and collaborative work on the cotton fields stopped abruptly. No one wanted to risk proximity to the boy, fearing that even casual interaction could bring illness, accident, or death. Markets became tense as people whispered in corners about who had seen the boy and what misfortune had recently struck that household. Fear transformed into social isolation, and the boy, still silent and composed, became a living symbol of dread. Within the plantations themselves, fear became almost paralyzing. Servants and enslaved workers who had previously moved freely around the estates found themselves reluctant to enter certain rooms or even pass by the boy. One elder woman recounted that she avoided the dining hall entirely if he was present, whispering prayers under her breath to protect herself and her family. Even seasoned overseers and supervisors reported being unnerved by his calm, deliberate manner, describing a sensation of being watched and measured by something beyond human understanding. The boy's silent observation seemed to carry an authority that no adult could challenge. The boy's uncanny influence was not limited to physical misfortune. It extended to psychological terror as well. Children in nearby households reported nightmares in which the boy appeared, standing silently in doorways or at the foot of beds. Adults admitted to feeling sudden waves of anxiety and dread when thinking about him or recalling a brief encounter. Some claimed that merely speaking his name aloud could cause unease, prompting the use of euphemisms or silence when referencing him. In this way, the boy's presence disrupted not only the daily routines of households, but also the very sense of safety and normalcy within the broader community. Merchants and visitors traveling through Natchez carried stories of the boy to other towns along the Mississippi River. Each retelling added to his growing reputation as a bringer of misfortune. The boy, however, remained unchanged, polite, quiet, and observant. No one could explain why disaster seemed drawn to him while he remained untouched. Attempts to examine him medically or spiritually yielded no answers. Clergy visited in hopes of blessing or exorcising him, only to leave shaken and confused, unable to account for the patterns they observed. The psychological effect of his presence intensified over time. Families who had once been prosperous found themselves constantly anxious, unable to perform routine tasks without fear. Crops were neglected, businesses faltered, and relationships deteriorated. Some speculated that the boy somehow absorbed or redirected misfortune, though no one could articulate the mechanism. Others, driven by superstition, claimed he could curse with his gaze or call death through his cries. Whether through natural or supernatural influence, the boy had become a pivot around which fear, uncertainty, and tragedy revolved. Neighbors attempted to shield themselves by avoiding the plantations entirely, creating physical and social barriers between themselves and the boy. But this only fueled the legend further. Accounts of unexplained deaths, sudden illnesses, and minor accidents in his proximity multiplied, and every new occurrence strengthened the perception that he carried a curse. Families that had no direct contact with him nevertheless altered their behavior, limiting travel, keeping children indoors, and avoiding any activity that might bring them near the boy's path. By the end of the year, the boy had not only left two families devastated, but had sown fear throughout Natchez itself. The social, psychological, and even physical influence he exerted was undeniable. No one could explain the pattern scientifically, spiritually, or logically. What had begun as the arrival of a seemingly ordinary child had grown into a pervasive, inescapable force, reshaping the lives of everyone in the community. The boy's presence became a dark legend in its own time, an invisible hand of misfortune that reminded every observer that some events, some beings, simply could not be explained. The final revelation that forced Natchez to bury the truth forever came after months of mounting fear and suspicion. By this point, nearly everyone who had come into contact with the boy, from the Whitmore household to the Carters, and even distant neighbors, had experienced some form of calamity, whether it was sudden death, mysterious illness, or inexplicable accidents. Rumors had spread like wildfire, but no one dared speak openly about what they truly believed. It was as if acknowledging the truth would summon it more strongly, giving the boy some invisible authority over the living. Yet despite the fear, curiosity persisted, and a few determined individuals, both town officials and private citizens, sought to uncover what exactly was happening. Investigations began quietly. The first step was medical. Doctors and scholars examined the boy to determine if there was a natural explanation for the deaths and misfortunes that seemed to follow him. He appeared perfectly healthy, displaying none of the symptoms that could account for the illnesses or accidents around him. Children he spent time with seemed normal until the misfortune struck, and no toxins, disease, or physical cause could be found. The more professionals studied him, the more baffling the situation became. Each unanswered question only deepened the community's unease. Parallel to the medical inquiries, local religious leaders attempted a spiritual explanation. Clergy visited the plantations with prayers, blessings, and even exorcisms in hopes of purifying the boy's presence or protecting the families. Yet each attempt ended with confusion and fear. Candles extinguished on their own, sacred items moved inexplicably, and some priests reported hearing whispers or cries in empty rooms. The boy himself remained composed, never resisting, never acknowledging the rituals, yet somehow commanding the attention of everyone present. These events convinced many that his influence was beyond both science and faith, an enigma that the town was not equipped to handle. The breaking point came when a respected local magistrate, visiting the Carter's plantation to witness the boy's behavior, was found dead under circumstances as mysterious as the Whitmore children's deaths. He had been in a private study, reviewing records, when a sudden crash was heard. By the time anyone entered, he was gone, apparently lifeless, with no signs of violence or illness. Panic swept through the community. It was now undeniable this boy's presence coincided with an extraordinary, deadly pattern that could no longer be ignored or rationalized. Families had been destroyed, reputations ruined, and the town itself was on edge. Faced with mounting fear and the inability to explain or contain the events, the townspeople convened a series of private meetings to decide how to respond. Public acknowledgement of the boy's power was unthinkable. Admitting such a thing would have caused mass hysteria and ruined the fragile social order. Instead, the consensus was clear: the truth must be hidden, the boy's story buried along with the memories of those who had suffered. Families who had been affected were warned to speak no more of the events, and witnesses were discreetly silenced or encouraged to relocate. The plantations themselves became shrouded in secrecy, and the boy was moved quietly, disappearing from public view to prevent further calamity. Even as the boy vanished from everyday life, the legend did not die. Those who had seen him carried memories of his calm presence and the tragedies that followed. Stories circulated in hushed tones, cautioning outsiders against questioning what they did not understand. Some claimed the boy had simply been adopted by a distant relative, sent far away, or even left Natchez entirely. But the pattern of misfortune had left its mark. Families broken, children lost, and a town forever altered by the unnerving realization that a single, silent child could wield influence over life and death in ways no one could explain. In the years that followed, Natchez became a place where superstition and caution coexisted uneasily with ordinary life. Parents warned children not to wander near the old plantations. Neighbors avoided each other when the topic arose, and those who had survived the boy's presence rarely spoke of him. The boy became an unspoken shadow in the town's collective memory, a symbol of forces beyond comprehension, a reminder that some events defy human understanding entirely. Ultimately, the final revelation was not a discovery of how or why the boy caused misfortune. It was the community's recognition that the truth was too dangerous to confront. The town chose silence over investigation, secrecy over explanation, and fear over curiosity. Natchez buried the story not in soil, but in the minds and memories of its residents, a cautionary tale of what can happen when the ordinary and the inexplicable collide. The boy, his presence, and the devastation he brought remained a mystery, preserved only in whispers and fragmented accounts, ensuring that his story, though hidden, would never be entirely forgotten.